Right Piano TV. Today's episode is based on tone quality, and it's dedicated to Ofer Horowitz, who is a very great young pianist and who's been emailing me with a couple of different questions. And this question is something I'm actually surprised I haven't done a video on, because I'm kind of a freak about tone quality, almost to the point of teachers saying, okay Josh, you can't play so soft all the time. Tone quality has to do with the concept that you don't want to play harsh. So if you were playing the beginning of Beethoven Concerto number 4, you wouldn't want that harsh sound, you'd want something very beautiful. Or if you're playing super loud things, let's say you're playing, let me think of a good example, Chopin Ballade number 3. A lot of times people it almost might even make that microphone distort there, I'm not sure. But it's this harsh hitting sound versus playing super loud, but still having good tone to it. It would be like screeching and really digging into a violin string versus, you know, having nice heavy weight on that on the strings via the bow, but still making that gorgeous, full, rich sound. I think it'd probably even be a little bit more obvious with something like a stringed instrument. So on piano, you have to be careful. And to be honest, there are so many different instances, even in great professional recordings where you will hear harsh notes, that it's a very subjective concept. And a lot of people, if I was to point, I'm not going to point to specific examples, but if I was to point to specific examples of very famous artists where I felt like they were actually too harsh, I know I'd get a ton of hate mail like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about because they were much better pianists than you. And of course they are. They're better pianists than I am. I'm talking some of the most famous pianists in history, but occasionally you will hear them play a harsh note and it's so brash and abrasive, it almost hurts your ears. And my teachers, Susan Dolmeyer, Logan Skelton, and Sergei Babayan, have always stressed that that you want to play with deep and rich feeling. I'm going to take a piece that might be a little bit unexpected for a tone quality piece, or a tone quality video, and it's this Schubert G major sonata, which is just heaven. We've already established the fact that if you're playing really big chords, you don't want to come from above. You always want to play from the keys versus a lot of times harsh tone quality comes from your wrist. But in this Schubert, what am I talking about with good tone quality here? To do with how the melody is voiced, how you're sinking your weight into the keys. So the weight comes from the arm, travels through the wrist, down into a pretty solid fingertip, but the hand itself can have a little bit of give. And that's at least how I think of varying dynamics. So if I want to play something rich and beautiful, let's say that this was written forte or fortissimo, I'd still play from the key, and I'd have less give in my wrist. It would stay more solid. So I'm not going to, you know, let it sink, you know, as much. Not as much rubbery feeling here. It'd be a little more solid, but you'd still play from the keys in order to get a good tone quality. Now with soft, you do the same thing with pianissimo. You'd still do the same thing, but you'd have a little more give. Voice your top. I have plenty of videos on voicing. Check those out. And you want to make sure that the left hand as well. A lot of people, when they're talking about tone quality, also plays into balance between the melody and the accompaniment. How do we get the soft left hand? You could pull back a little bit. it's mezzo forte. I'm not going to get too big because I don't want to kill it, but again, I'm playing from the keys and I'm transferring the weight. I never force the weight into it. Let's talk about a totally extreme different example. Let's maybe take the coda of the second ballad. I've been performing all the ballades quite a bit lately, and I always demonstrate with the first ballad because I've known it the longest. But we'll take something like... The way you don't get harsh... Again, you try not to play too far above. A lot of teachers teach this, and it's actually a totally good and sound concept. They'll say, drop your weight into the keys, drop your weight into the keys, and they'll just have you do that over and over again. But I don't like teaching that way because what this does is sometimes if you feel like you're dropping into the keys, sometimes students will force it a little bit, and then you get that really harsh, ugly sound. So you want to, I always like to tell my students, play from the keys and then play down and up, kind of. Okay, so. Okay, now fast. Those got a little harsh at the end. Let's see. I should also mention that tone quality is often derived from tension. Bad tone quality is often derived from bad tension in your hand. So if you have a tense hand versus that still sounds nice and loud, but this video has been helpful. Mostly play from the keys and you can transfer more weight or less weight, but you still always want to use arm weight to transfer into the keys to get that nice, beautiful, rich singing tone quality. And you could have a little bit more give and rubberiness in your hand when you want the tone quality to be softer, and when you want it to be more solid, just keep your wrist and your hand more solid. Not tense, but just solid. Like you don't want to hold bad tension like you feel like it's locked. I hope this has been helpful. If any of you have any questions, my email is josh@joshwrightpiano.com. You can check out, if you want to hear the Schubert G major, it is on our new meditation CD that my wife and I recently released. So I will link an iTunes link to that below, and also a link to my website, and you can purchase a signed copy if you're interested in that for yourself or for a gift. So thank you so much. Have a great week.
Hi guys! Have you ever had days or even weeks where everything seems to go wrong during your practice? You either lack motivation, or it's hard to focus, or your hands and fingers are simply not listening to you, or you can't seem to make much progress even after hours of practice. I'm sure you have, especially if you've been playing piano for more than a couple of months. We all have such days, and that's what I want to talk to you about in today's video. The fact that in learning any art, progress is not a straight line that goes up smoothly and steadily. Instead, it's more like a zigzag that has plenty of ups and downs, plateaus followed by sudden breakthroughs, and it's the power of your perseverance that will safely carry you through all of them and help you to succeed. The good news is that everything becomes easier once you understand how things work and you see the bigger picture, and this is what we will learn to do today. A musician's journey can be compared to a roller coaster. Some days are quite magical. We feel inspired and full of energy. Our productivity is off the charts. Our mind, hearing, and fingers work in perfect sync. If only we could bottle that feeling, right? On other days, everything seems upside down. And the funny thing is that we're not doing anything differently. So how come the same practice routine has such unexpected results sometimes? Why even the most consistent and serious practice is not always 100% productive? Nobody knows all the answers to these questions, even though there are some very interesting theories, and I'll mention a few of them at the end of this video. For now though, you have to understand that this up and down pattern is normal, and that you are not alone when you feel down and you're afraid that you'll never make any real progress. And once you know that this is how things work, this is how we learn, you will not waste energy fighting these oscillations or blaming yourself each time a deeper valley appears in your path. Instead, you'll accept it, you'll make the most of the landscape and enjoy the ride, even on the days when the road is a bit bumpy or the climb is a bit tougher than usual. It's the hard days, those deeper valleys, that will really test your commitment to the instrument. On those inevitable days when you can't seem to do anything right, you may be tempted to give it all up. Watching TV, checking email or social media, anything will feel more tempting than practicing the piano. But while short breaks are good, as I explained in my video tutorial when to take a break in your practice, never let a few bad days destroy your love for piano playing or make you give up on your dreams. Remember that musical progress is not linear, and that uninspired days will follow those productive days, just like night comes after day. Have you ever looked at one of those huge paintings? First, let's learn how to place our foot on the pedal correctly. Your foot should not cover the entire pedal, so avoid doing something like this, but only its larger part. So you should place your foot like this on the pedal. You always have to try to press the pedal as smoothly as possible, you see, without making sudden movements and without making noise. So you should avoid this kind of noise and this kind of sudden movements. Also, when you work with the pedal, make sure that your foot is in permanent contact with the surface of the pedal. So you don't have to raise your foot like this. Keep the contact with the pedal, and this will ensure that you're using it as smoothly and as correctly as possible. The first rule in using the piano pedals is to activate your hearing. The great piano professor Heinrich Niegaus used to say that the art of pedaling is governed by the ear. There is no such thing as a correct pedal. We don't have to play a piece with or without pedal only because somebody said that this is the correct way of doing it. For example, what is correct for a composer is totally inappropriate for another composer, and what is suitable for the classical style is completely not appropriate for the romantic style, and so on. I describe in my article on pianocareer.com the most suitable pedaling techniques depending on style and composer. So I will say that there are two ways of using the piano pedals, especially the sustain. Not correct and incorrect, but on one hand musically appropriate and on the other hand musically inappropriate. There are simply beautiful, convincing performances where the use of the pedal is harmoniously integrated into the artistic message of the piece. And of course, there are less inspired performances where the pedal sounds dirty because the pianist is playing mechanically without being aware of the accuracy of the sound, without activating his or her hearing. So instead of talking about a correct way of using the pedals, I'm simply going to describe the main pedaling techniques and how we should use them in order to create certain effects. And in the end, it will be up to you and your hearing how to use the knowledge that you're about to learn. There are three main pedaling techniques. The first one is called the delayed pedal. We can also call it the indirect pedal, the retarded pedal, or the legato pedal. And in some books I also came across the term syncopated pedal. All these English terms are approximate translations of the Russian term запаздывающая педаль. And now I'm going to show you this technique. We call it a delayed pedal because we press it immediately after playing the note, but before releasing the key. Its function is to hold the sound until we press the next one. This way, creating a connection between a series of separated sounds. Let's begin with an easy example. Let's imagine that we have to play on legato, that we have to connect several notes that are situated far from each other, no matter what notes we're talking about. So we press the first note, we catch it with the pedal, making sure that we press the pedal after playing the note but before releasing the key. and then we change the pedal on the following note. What happens is a reverse movement. Each time our fingers goes down, the pedal goes up and then down. So up and down, up and down. And this way we change the pedal on each new note or on each new chord, making sure that each new sound or harmony sounds clean. So one more time, let's see how this delayed pedaling technique works. Engage, release, engage, release, engage, release the pedal, engage it, so release and engage. This is how it works, and you see what amazing effect it can create. And also, besides creating this connection, it also helps us to keep each new harmony clean from notes, from dissonant notes that don't belong in this particular harmony, in this particular chord. Now let's play an example that I really like. It's an easy piece from Tchaikovsky's children's album. It's the last piece called In Church. It's a classical example of creating a beautiful legato between different chords by using the delayed type of pedaling technique. Also, please notice that I don't change the pedal on each chord. For example, this is a G chord, and I'm not changing the pedal each time I repeat this chord. I'm changing it only on each new harmony. Your hearing and your hearing alone should determine how often you change the pedal. Of course, you cannot do something like this. Do you see how dirty it sounds? On the other hand, it's not necessary to change the pedal on each chord. Change and change and change. No. This E minor chord goes on the same pedal. Then we change and we change again and again. This is a D major chord. And again we change here and we change here again. A false, dirty, dissonant pedal means not activating your hearing and gluing sounds that simply don't belong together. For example, like this. It sounds awful, let's face it. So we covered the first pedaling technique, also called the delayed pedal. Now we'll move to the next one, to the simultaneous pedaling technique, also called the direct pedal. We don't use this technique for creating a connection or for making a beautiful legato. We need it only for accenting a certain chord or a certain note, for making it sound deeper, more important, more intense. This pedal is useful in playing pieces with a sharp, exact dancing character, especially in waltzes. So let me give you an example from Grieg's Waltz Opus 12, number 2. So as you see, I press the pedal only on the first beat of the bar and I release it on the second. So I press simultaneously with the note and I release it on the second beat. So press, release, press, release. And you see what kind of character it allows us to create. So this type of pedaling technique allows us to feel the rhythm of the piece better. Now we have reached the third pedaling technique, and it is the easiest one. It's called the preliminary pedal. It means pressing the pedal before playing the first sound of a certain piece. Sometimes we can use this type of trick for activating all the resonating properties of the piano, so that when we begin to play, the sound will be really deep and really intense, because it will have the backup of all the other strings. Because as you all know, when we press the sustain pedal, all the dampers are being raised and the strings, all the strings are free to resonate. And when we press the first chord of a certain piece, it already has a very intense sonority, a very deep one. Now that I showed you the main pedaling techniques, I should also mention that there are several gradation types in using the right pedal, the sustain pedal. Yes, that's right, there are different ways of pressing the right pedal. We have the full pedal, the half pedal and also the quarter pedal. But since the last one is a really subtle and complicated technique, we'll cover it sometimes in the future. For now, we'll talk only about the full pedal and the half pedal. The full pedal is the easiest one. It means pressing the pedal all the way down and then raising it or changing it all the way up. With the half pedal, things get more interesting. This technique is not necessary for beginners, being usually explained only to advanced students. I'll write about this type of pedal gradation in my article about the art of pedaling on pianocareer.com. And now I'll only say that it is extremely useful when we have to play multi-layered music, for example, piano transcriptions of Bach's organ works, where we have 3 staves instead of 2, and we have, for example, to hold the bass note and at the same time change the pedal and make the higher registers sound really clean, really transparent and detached. And it's also useful in playing orchestral transcriptions and other complex piano works. And now a bonus pedaling technique, which is called the gradual release of the pedal. It is especially useful in the end of the piece when playing the final chord or the final note. So let's imagine that we're playing a certain piece which ends with a D minor chord. And please compare. Now I'm playing this chord. And now I released the pedal abruptly. And now I'm playing the same chord and I will release the pedal gradually, allowing the sound to fade naturally until it disappears. So you see the difference and you see that the second technique is much more convincing. My tutorial also has another part, which is understanding pedal notation. I covered this topic in my article on Piano Career as well, and I also describe how to use the pedal depending on the epoch when the piece was written and also depending on the style of the composer. As a conclusion, I will say that no matter what piece you play, you don't have to follow the pedal indications from your score literally by pressing and releasing the pedal in the exact place, the exact millimeter where the composer or the editor indicated. Yes, you should use these indications as, let's say, road directions, but in the end you have to trust your own sense of style, your own hearing, and do not allow the sonority to become dirty, to become cluttered with sounds that do not belong there and do not match the style, the character and the atmosphere of the piece. My name is Ilinka Vartik, thank you for watching, and if you're interested in more piano playing secrets and tips, go ahead and visit my website pianocareer.com. Thanks and talk to you soon!
Hi everyone, this is Josh with Josh Wright Piano TV. Today's episode is a pretty hot topic on Quora. I had such a good response to my video called "Is it too late for adults to start piano?" That I thought I would just research more of the hot questions on that site in regards to piano playing. And one of the big topics is, how can I study piano if I can't afford a piano teacher? Or what are some of the tips that you'd go over? As many of you know, my #1 tip for getting good at piano, besides working hard, is to get the best teacher you can afford. But I understand probably a lot of you that are watching this video can't afford piano lessons, which is why you're turning to YouTube for tutorials. And I think YouTube's a great resource for supplementing as well if you are in lessons. But I did want to address this concept. I obviously think taking lessons and having a guide to help you is the most intellectual thing you can do, and a good quality teacher. I mean, you can waste so much money with a poor teacher. If you don't feel like you're progressing with your current teacher, you should switch. And that's just that's just good market economics, I guess. If, you know, supply and demand for the best teachers can sometimes come at a price. But beyond that, if you can't afford a teacher, I put together a little list here. And the first thing that I would do is set up a good practice regimen. A lot of people ask me, what's your regimen? I may even do a separate video talking about what I'm just going to talk about, because I think people need to know this. The way I teach almost every student until they become very advanced is I will do a technique, a reading or like a sight reading or quick study. By the way, quick study means that you're learning a piece in a week or two. So it's something that you check off quickly, or it can just be straight sight reading. And then the third thing is repertoire. So technique could be scales, it could be arpeggios, triads, seventh chords. I usually take my students through all of those first. And if they're little kids and they can't handle like 4-octave scales, maybe I'll do 2 octaves at a time, or I will start them off in like a dozen a day or finger power or something like that. I'm going to link those books below. I'm also going to link a ton of other books below from my other video, Is It Too Late to Learn Piano? You can check those out. Faber Piano Adventures adult course is an awesome course in 2 books that you can get through. I think real bright young kids could get through it just fine too. If they're real small, like 5 or 6 years old, I would definitely recommend starting in the kids' books though. There's like Czerny exercises, Hannon, Schmidt. There's some fun books called Jazz, Rags, and Blues. So I'll link all of those in the description below. So the first big piece of advice, if you can't afford piano lessons, set up a good regimen for yourself. Let me go through and tell you how I would divide that. What I would do is I would probably do, if you're doing an hour, let me go through and tell you how, piece of advice, if you can't afford piano lessons, set up a good regimen for yourself. Let me go through and tell you how I would divide that. What I would do is I would probably do, if you're doing an hour a day, I would do probably 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes on technique. And so if you are trying to squeeze in scales, arpeggios, triads, seventh chords into 20 minutes, it's not going to be high quality. Maybe just stick with a scale. If you have more time, you can work on more skills. Then I would do probably 10 minutes of sight reading. So we're at about 25 to 30 minutes of your hour, and then I'd spend the rest of the time on repertoire. Well, you're like, okay, I've got a half an hour, but I've got 10 repertoire pieces. You need to cut it down to 2 or 3. I highly recommend only working on 1 to 3 pieces. If it's a huge piece, just do 1. Like right now, all I'm working on is Rachmaninoff Third Concerto because I have a performance with the symphony in January, and I'm already working on it. It's June. Okay, so it's 7 months away or 8 months away, but still trying to prepare early. So that's what I would do to set up a good regimen. And I would either do one of 2 things. If you have a 30 minutes and you're kind of at a beginning phase, it's okay to do 15 and 15. If you're working on more advanced repertoire and you really only have an hour a day and you can't do much more, either cut it back to the 1 piece and do all 30 minutes, or do a rotation between 2 pieces, 20 minutes and 10, and then switch that the next day, 10 minutes and 20, so that you're spending enough time, maybe a little extra time each day on one of the pieces so that your quality, the depth that you get, works really well. I've even seen students do every other day the full 30 minutes with a piece. That's very good. The second thing that I would recommend is constantly listen to recordings. I recently had to memorize, I think I may have told this in the Tchaikovsky video, I can't remember, but I had a performance of Tchaikovsky Concerto. I'll link that in the description. I've got a lot of links to put down here. But it was mid-April, and he said, do you want to play on the 22nd? And I said, yeah, sure, that's fine. And of May. So, and I hadn't played this piece for 3 years, and I'd only ever learned about half of the Tchaikovsky first movement. I learned second and third movement, but in Michigan I was competing in this concerto competition that had a time limit. So I ended up needing to learn half and memorize it in 2 weeks instead of the 5 weeks that I supposedly had, because he called me up and said, oh, we have another performance on May 6th. Can you do that? And I was like, oh my gosh. So I started working on it about April 20th or 22nd. And it actually went pretty well on the 6th. And then I thought it went really well on the 22nd. So my point is, I was listening to a recording of that piece as often as possible. It gets into your ear, it gets into your brain, and you start, my friend Sean Chen wrote he was like 3rd place in Van Cliburn, he's won all these awards, a very great pianist. He mentioned in this thing, in his blog, you can just Google his name, and it will link to his blog, and he said, one of the biggest thing is getting the piece in your ear. And I thought, well, yeah, duh. But the way he said it was very thoughtful. He said, what it allows you to do is to start to develop the structure of the piece in your mind as you listen to it. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 1, set up a good regimen. Tip number 2, listen to a recording of your pieces constantly. It will help the learning process tremendously. And then also listen to good recordings of other stuff. You develop a lot as a musician, especially if you're not taking lessons with a teacher. You can learn a lot from other recordings and just listening to pianists in general. My third piece of advice seems a little counterintuitive, but it seeks supplemental lessons when possible. So if you can afford a once-a-month lesson or once every 2 months, that's better than nothing. A lot of people say it's all or nothing. You know, I'm either taking lessons or I'm not. But it's nice to occasionally go to an expert teacher and have them help you fix little things here and there along the way if you can't afford weekly lessons with them. 4, record yourself and listen back. This is one of the most important things that none of us really do enough. I definitely don't do it enough because it's painful to listen back to yourself, totally suck it up on a recording of even your practice sessions, but it is one of the quickest ways to improve. Let me grab this mic over here. This is the mic I recommend. So this is like a $900 microphone, and I use this to record albums with and most of my videos at this point. This is an AKG 414. But this one is very affordable and it's awesome quality, especially just for recording at home. This is Yeti Silver Edition. I'll link that in the comments below as well if you want to check that out. The last piece of advice is play on different pianos. Obviously, if you have a teacher that you're going to their house, sometimes teachers come to your house, but if you're going to a teacher's house weekly, you're playing on a different piano. So tip number 5 is to expose yourself as much as possible. Maybe that means going to a different piano store in your area. If you have a few different ones, maybe you go in once a week and try out your pieces on one of those because you're going to be buying a piano or something like that. If you have friends that have grand pianos, or I'm a member of a church, and my church, every church in my whole organization, I'm LDS, and every church has a grand piano. And most Catholic churches and Presbyterian churches and Lutheran churches that I've been in, they all have pianos. So check that out if you have a chance to play on grand piano, especially. The difference between, in case you don't know, the difference between an upright piano is when you push a key down, a hammer is thrown forward. So it's a vertical string board, like a soundboard with string. Upright piano is when you push a key down, a hammer is thrown forward. So it's a vertical string board, like a soundboard with strings attached to it, and hammers are thrown forward. On a grand piano, the soundboard is horizontal and the hammers are thrown vertically. So it's just the opposite, and it does give a different feel to it. So anytime you have a chance to practice on a grand piano, do it. I wanted to quickly give a scenario of how I would upgrade your equipment. So what I would do is a good weighted keyboard would be an okay way to start. Don't get a keyboard that's not weighted unless you can't afford it. I mean, something's better than nothing, but a weighted keyboard is an okay way to start. Again, there's going to be technical limitations, but I'm a realist. I'm not this idealist that says never play on anything but a grand piano. I realize people can't afford it. One of my students in New York, very wealthy guy, one of the most generous guys I've ever met, he bought one of the nicest pianos nicest keyboards. It's a Yamaha N2, and I think there's an N3 that's even more expensive, but I mean, that's like a $12,000 digital piano, but it's amazing. They actually have hammers that lift up, so it's like you're playing on an acoustic piano, but you have sound control if you're in an apartment. That's a great way to go if you're in a city. Then I would go with an acoustic upright. I like Yamaha personally. I mean, I'm a Steinway artist, but I don't advocate necessarily paying $25,000 for an upright piano. I'd much rather have you buy a used Steinway grand for that much. So I found Yamahas. I grew up playing on a QIWI for the first 2 years of my piano studies. Those are fine. I love Baldwin pianos. I don't even think they make those anymore. Obviously Steinway's my favorite, but so far as those, I definitely upright pianos, I advocate those brands. And then finally small grands and then full concert grands. Steinway Bs and Ds are my favorites, but those can run anywhere between, if you're getting a used one, $40,000 to $150,000. So those are insanely expensive. Other grand pianos that I really love are Bechstein pianos. Not a huge fan of Faziolis. Grand $1,000 to Ds are my favorites, but those can run anywhere between, if you're getting a used one, $40,000 to $150,000. So those are insanely expensive. Other grand pianos that I really love are Bechstein pianos. Not a huge fan of Faziolis, except when I was playing Totentons. It was unbelievable because that thing just projects to the back of the hall. So I liked that. Yamaha has nice upright grand pianos. Again, a lot of those are machine-made parts, so you get a lot of consistency in Yamahas, and Steinways, like every Steinway is a different beast, but they're all handmade. I mean, this is one of my favorite pianos. This is a Hamburg Steinway O. So if you can afford the Steinway, go with the Steinway. It's the best in the world, and I mean, like, over 90% of concert artists agree with me on that because they all choose Steinways for the most part. But there's other great brands too. So I hope these 5 tips have been helpful. Again, good regimen, technique, sight reading, repertoire. Listen constantly to recordings. Seek supplemental lessons when you can. Record yourself and listen back. You can start with an iPhone recording, but it compresses. Listen constantly to recordings. Seek supplemental lessons when you can. Record yourself and listen back. You can start with an iPhone recording, but it compresses the sound so you don't get a true dynamic range. Get one of these, $100 on Amazon or around 100. And then 5 play on as many different pianos as you can. That's a small guide to help you become as best as you can without the help of a teacher. And I hope this video has been helpful. I have a channel dedicated to learning piano, advanced tips, lessons for beginners. Just so you know, my #1 course is called the Pro Practice Technique Series. When I say it's my #1 course, it's the #1 course I recommend, and it's also my highest selling course because it's something that can take you and give you all the foundational materials that you'll need with scales, arpeggios, triads, and 7th chords. So that's a good place to insert your technique into that regimen, is with this Pro Practice Technique Series, just taking one video every week or 2 and going through that. So if you want to check that out, I'll also link it below. So I'm going to link repertoire books, the Yeti microphone, that series, everything below if you want to check those out in the comments section. Thank you so much for joining me today. You are going to see a subscribe button come up here, or sorry, my website come up here, a subscribe button down here, and then 2 videos come up over here. If you'd like to keep watching, please subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my website for a lot of free resources as well. Have a great week. Good luck in your practicing.